11 nights into holding the cultivation site, Huxley Sorn caught himself checking the same perimeter post for the third time in an hour, and understood that the dead were not the thing wearing him down. He stopped with his hand on the cold timber of the post and made himself see what he was doing. The post was fine. He had checked it twice already, and it had been fine both times, and it was fine now. There was no reason to be here except that being here, doing something with his hands, was better than the alternative, which was lying in the dark in the command tent doing arithmetic he could not solve. 11 days since he had walked Sybil to the tree line and watched the dark take her. 11 days of holding a long clearing at the edge of the interior, rows of tidewood seedlings in turned soil, irrigation channels, a camp of frightened cultivators at the protected center, and around all of it the iron compact, the unit he had built, holding the ground he had chosen to hold. The dead came most nights. The compact put them down. That part was working. The part that was not working was inside him, and he knew it, and knowing it had not yet been enough to fix it. He had started checking things twice that did not need checking twice. He had started standing watches he did not need to stand. He had started giving orders a half-step tighter than the situation called for, not wrong orders, just tighter, the orders of a man who had lost his grip on the one thing that mattered most and was closing his fist around everything else to make up for it. His people had noticed. They had not said anything. The iron compact did not question Sorn. That was the problem with being the kind of commander people did not question. When you started to slip, no one told you. Sybil would have told him. Sybil was 3 days into the dead lands, past the reach of any help he could send, and the relay schedule said her first signal was due, and every hour past due was an hour Sorn spent not breathing quite right. He took his hand off the post. He did not check it a fourth time. That was the one small victory he managed before dawn, and it was not much of one. The first sign that the next 2 days would be different did not come from the interior. It came from the road. A rider came up from the coast at mid-morning, not one of Sorn's, not consortium livery he recognized. A lone, hard-faced man on a tired horse who asked for the commander by name and handed him a sealed message and waited, which meant a reply was expected. Sorn read it twice, the way he read everything. It was from Lyra Aldenmere, the head of the family that had hired him, the one they called the gambler, the woman who had bet her whole house on this site taking root. The message was polite. It was also, under the politeness, a warning, and Sorn had read enough messages from powerful people to hear the thing under the words. There was a problem inside the consortium. The Aldenmere bet on this site had enemies, other families who had counseled against it, who had money in the old dying tidewood groves and stood to lose if the new site proved the future. Lyra had learned that one of them had moved. There were men coming to the site, she wrote, who would arrive as inspectors, as auditors, as concerned partners. They were none of those things. They were here to make the site fail, quietly, in a way that could be blamed on the dead or on Sorn's incompetence, so that the Aldenmere bet collapsed and the men in the old groves kept their money and their power. Hold the site, Lyra wrote, hold it against them too. I am paying you to hold this ground, and the ground now includes the people who will arrive smiling. Sorn folded the message. He looked at the rider. Tell her I read it, Sorn said. Tell her the site holds all of it. The rider went, and Sorn stood in the 11-day-old camp with a new enemy on the road and an old one in the trees, and the best soldier he had somewhere past both, and understood that the next while was going to ask more of him than the dead ever had. Sybil's first signal came that night, and it was everything he had been afraid of and everything he had needed. The relay worked the way they had built it, a series of drops, marks left at points on a schedule, read by the compact's people working the near edge of the interior under cover of clearing the dead. The mark came in just after dark. One of his scouts brought it to him folded small, and Sorn took it to the lamp in the command tent and read it alone, because some things a commander reads alone. It was short, Sybil was short by training and shorter by nature, but every word in it landed. She was alive, that was the first thing, and Sorn let himself have one full breath on it before he read the rest. She had found sign of the construction. Not the thing itself, not yet, but the edges of it, the dead moving wrong in the deep interior, organized, drawn inward toward something, the way water spirals toward a drain. She was following it in. She was closer than the plan had projected, which meant she was deeper, which meant she was further from any help than they had modeled. And the last line, the line he read 4 times, something here moves the dead with no one near it, not like the king, different, be careful what you think you know. Sorn sat with that in the lamplight. He did not fully understand it, different from the king, no one near it, and he did not need to, because the part he understood was enough. Sybil had seen something out there that did not fit, something that unsettled her, and Sybil did not unsettle. She was the steadiest person he had ever commanded. If the interior had shown her something that made her write "be careful what you think you know," then the interior was worse and stranger than any of them had known when he sent her into it. And he had sent her into it. That was the thought that came up out of the furnished room where he kept such things, and he pushed it back down, because a commander who let that thought loose mid-operation got people killed. She was alive. She was doing the work. She was the best he had ever sent anywhere, and she had said "be careful, not come get me," and the difference between those two was the whole discipline of not crossing the wall to reach her. He held to the difference. It was all he had to hold to. He was still holding it when the inspectors arrived the next morning, smiling, exactly as Lyra had said they would. There were 4 of them, with a small escort of hired men, and they came up the road in consortium colors with papers and credentials, and the easy confidence of people who have never personally held a line against anything. Their leader was a soft-spoken man named Castor who introduced himself as a partner come to assess the site's progress, and who looked at the rows of seedlings and the defenses and the 11-day-old camp with the eyes of a man pricing a thing he intended to break. Sorn met them the way he met everything, calm, unhurried, giving nothing. He had read Lyra's warning. He knew what these men were. And he knew, with the cold clarity that the lamplight had not touched, that he could not simply turn them away, because they had papers and standing, and the consortium was the thing paying for all of this. And a commander who threw out credentialed partners on the word of one warning could be the incompetence the whole scheme needed to point at. "You're welcome to assess," Sorn told Castor. "In the daylight, with one of my people walking with you. The site is under nightly assault from the interior. I won't have partners wandering my perimeter after dark and becoming casualties I have to explain to the consortium." "How considerate," Castor said, "though I'd hate for your escort to feel like a guard." "Call it whatever helps you sleep," Sorn said. "It walks with you regardless." Castor smiled and agreed, because agreeing cost him nothing and refusing would have shown his hand. And Sorn assigned the escort, not to protect the partners, though he let them think that, but to be his eyes on men he could not afford to lose track of, and went back to the work with one more thing to track than a man fighting on one front had any business tracking. So he let them in, and he watched them, and he set his people to watch them. And the site that had been holding against one enemy was now holding against 2, one in the trees and one walking its own rows in consortium colors, and Sorn felt his attention split into pieces he could not afford to divide it into, with a third piece already 3 days into the interior where it could do no good at all. They came at him from both sides on the second night, and afterward Sorn was certain the timing had not been chance. The dead came first, a real push out of the interior, the organized kind, the kind with a hand on it, hitting the perimeter harder than any night since the site was raised. The compact answered. Sorn answered with them in the line where the pressure was worst, and for a while it was only the old clean problem of holding ground against the dead, the problem he understood in his bones. Wave 1 hit the west perimeter and the compact held it, because Sorn had read the push building and thickened the west before it landed. The dead came against a prepared line and died on it. He moved along the line as he always did, reading the whole of it, killing where he stood. A dead thing came over the channel at him, and he took its head with one stroke and was turning to the next before it fell. The west held. It cost 2 wounded and no dead. A good result. Then a lull, and Sorn did not trust it because the dead did not pause. A drift surge did not stop and gather. Only a directed one did, and a directed pause meant a hand on the dead was repositioning them, which meant a second wave was coming and coming smarter. It came at the seam, the join between the west perimeter and the south, the weakest point of any line because it was where two groups of defenders had to trust each other's edges. A mindless tide would never have found the seam. This one went straight for it, a concentrated push hitting exactly where the line was thinnest, and for a moment the seam bent and a knot of the dead came through into the open ground inside the perimeter. Sorn was there before the bend became a break. He took the first one through to come inside with a downward stroke and put his shoulder into the second to buy the half-second his nearest soldier needed to recover the line. Seam, he called, not loud, just clear, and two of the reserve he had held back for exactly this came across at a dead run and filled it. The break closed. The dead that had gotten inside were put down in the open where they had no support. It cost another wounded and a bad few seconds, and then the seam held too. Then the real lull, and in the lull the cost registered, because while the whole camp's attention was on the west perimeter and the seam and the dead, the inspectors had not been idle. One of his scouts found him in the lull, breathing hard, with news that was worse than the dead. "Commander," the scout kept his voice low. "The partners, they're at the irrigation works, Castor and two of his men. They've got the cultivator's head engineer with them and they're giving orders, telling our people to open the south channels, said it's an inspection of the flow." Sorn understood it at once, because he had been waiting for exactly this shape of thing without knowing its details. The south channels fed the seedlings. Open them wrong at night during an attack, and you flooded the low rows and drowned 11 days of the most valuable plants in the world, and it would look like an accident or like Sorn's people had panicked under the assault and mismanaged the works. The dead on the west were not the attack. The dead on the west were the cover. Castor had waited for the night the dead came hard, so that every eye went to the perimeter, and then moved to break the sight from the inside while calling it an inspection. "He's using the attack," Sorn said. "The dead are his distraction, clever." He was already moving. "With me, quietly. We don't make a scene the partners can write down, we just stop it." He crossed the camp fast and came on the scene at the irrigation works exactly as Lyra's warning had promised, and he handled it the way he was learning he had to handle the new enemy. Not with a blade, which would have been simpler, but with the cold and the calm and the refusal to give them the incident they wanted. Castor was at the south sluice with two of his men and the cultivator's engineer. A frightened older man holding a lever he plainly did not want to pull. "Commander Sorn," Castor smiled. "Good, we're conducting a flow inspection. Your camp's irrigation discipline is part of the site's viability, and viability is what I'm here to assess. Your engineer here was just going to open the south works so I can observe the drainage." "At night," Sorn said, "during an assault with the low rows planted." "The timing is unfortunate. Inspections happen when the inspector is present." Sorn looked at him for a long moment. He did not raise his voice. He had learned across 20 years that the men who needed to raise their voices were the men who did not have the situation, and he had this situation, even split 3 ways, even tired, even afraid for someone 3 days gone. "The engineer is going to step away from that lever," Sorn said. "Because if those channels open and the low rows flood, the report that reaches Lyra Aldenmere and the full consortium will not say the site failed. It will say a partner named Castor ordered the flooding of the most valuable planting in the coast, at night, under cover of an undead assault, against the explicit objection of the contracted commander, and it will have the names of every man here who watched him do it." He let that sit. "You came to make me the incompetence. You can't be the incompetence yourself. So step away from the lever, Castor, and go back to your tent, and inspect the site in the daylight like a man who has nothing to hide." It was not a threat. It was arithmetic laid out flat, and Castor was a man who understood arithmetic, which was why he was dangerous and also why he lost. He held Sorn's eyes for a moment, looking for the bluff, and did not find one because there was not one. Then he smiled again, a thinner smile, and stepped back from the sluice. "In the daylight then," Castor said. "You're a careful man, Commander." "I am," Sorn said. "It's why my sites don't flood." Castor withdrew toward his tent with his men. And it was exactly then, with Soren's attention on the retreating partners and the engineer being walked clear of the sluice, that the dead made their last try of the night, a final shove on the west, smaller than the others but timed, hitting in the one moment the commander's eyes were on the wrong enemy. Soren felt it before the shout came. He had spent the whole night learning the rhythm of being attacked from two directions, and the lesson the night kept teaching was that the two enemies were not separate. Castor used the dead, and so the dead and Castor were one problem wearing two faces, and a commander who let either one pull his eyes fully off the other lost both. West, Soren said, already turning, already moving. He did not run. Running told the partners watching from their tent that the commander could be rattled. He moved fast and level and reached the west line as the last push hit it, and he put himself in it, and the compact closed around him, and they held the final wave the way they had held the first, because the reserve was where he had left it and the line was where he had drawn it, and the part of Soren that commanded had never once, all night, fully let go of the ground even while the rest of him did arithmetic in three directions. The last of the dead went down, the west held. The night was over and Soren had won all of it, and that was the moment he understood what the night had actually cost. He had won both fights, and standing in the dark afterward, he felt no victory in it, because winning had taken something he could not afford to spend. The dead were beaten back on the west. The engineer was clear of the lever and the low rows were dry. Castor had withdrawn, beaten on the night but not gone, because men like Castor were never gone. They only waited for the next night the dead came hard. Soren had held the sight against both enemies at once, and the compact had taken only a handful of wounded, and by every measure that mattered to the contract it had been a good night. And he had spent the entire night with a third of his mind 3 days into the interior, and he knew it, and his people knew it, and that was the cost the site was extracting that the contract did not name. One of his lieutenants found him before dawn, a steady woman named Halloran who had been with the compact 8 years, and had earned the right to say things to Soren that others could not. "That was good work tonight, Commander," Halloran said, "both of them, the west and the sluice. It was necessary work, good is for after." It was good work, she did not let him have the deflection. "And I'm going to say a thing and you can tell me to stand down after, but I'm going to say it first." She waited until he looked at her. "You're holding the reins too tight the last few days. You're standing watches that aren't yours and checking work that's already checked and giving the line orders a half beat tighter than the line needs. The people feel it. They won't say it because they're yours and they trust you, but it's there." Soren said nothing for a moment. The accusation was true. He knew it was true. That was the worst part of it, that he had known and had not stopped, because stopping meant feeling the thing the tightness was holding down. "Noted Lieutenant," he said, not warmly, not a denial either. "I'm not finished, I think I know why." Halloran's voice stayed level, kind under the steadiness. "I don't know where you sent her, I'm not asking. But the unit knows you sent somebody into that interior, and the unit knows it matters to you more than a job should, and the unit knows you've been wrong-footed since the night you walked to the tree line and came back alone." She paused. "You can't reach her, Commander, so you're reaching for everything else. We see it. We just need you to see it too, because a commander holding too tight is a commander who breaks something, and we'd rather it not be us." It was the truest thing anyone had said to him in 11 days, and it was Sybil's job to say it, and Sybil was 3 days into the dead lands, and someone else had had to do it because she was not here. That was the moment the thing he had been holding down almost came up. He did not let it, but it was close, closer than it had been, and he knew Halloran saw that too. He gave her the only honest answer he had, because she had earned honesty, and because a lie would have been worse than the truth between people who had bled together for 8 years. "You're right," Soren said. "All of it, I am holding too tight, I know I am. And I know why, and I'm not going to tell you where she is, but you've read it close enough." He looked east toward the interior, toward the dark that had taken Sybil 11 days ago, and that her one short message had reached out of, alive, close to something, telling him to be careful what he thought he knew. "There's exactly one thing in the world I can't control right now," he said, and it's the only thing I'd trade the whole site to control. So I'm controlling the site instead, twice as hard as it needs. You're right that it's a problem. I don't have a better answer tonight than knowing it. Knowing it is the answer for tonight, Halloran said. Loosen the grip a little tomorrow, that's all. The unit doesn't need you perfect, it needs you not breaking. I won't break. I know you won't, she said. I'm telling you so you don't. And she left him there at the edge of the camp with the first gray of dawn coming up over the interior. Soren stood the last of the watch alone and did the thing he had been avoiding for 11 days, which was to let himself feel, for exactly the length of one dawn, the size of what he had done. He had sent the best soldier he ever commanded, his closest friend, the steadiest mind he knew, into the worst country in the world alone, because she was the only one who could go and the coast needed what she could learn. Every part of that decision was correct. He would make it again. And it was slowly taking him apart from the inside, because he had built his whole life on the one principle that his people came home, and he had personally walked one of them into a place he could not follow, and now all he could do was hold a patch of forest and read the marks she left and wait. And the waiting was a country he had never lived in before and did not know how to survive. The grip was the symptom. Halloran was right. He could not control whether Sybil lived, so he was controlling channels and watches and the exact tightness of a defensive line. And it was not the same thing, and it would never be the same thing, and some part of him had known that from the first night and done it anyway. He made himself breathe. He made himself, in the gray light, set down the watches that were not his and the checks that were already done, not all at once. He was not capable of all at once, but a little, the way Halloran had asked. He would hold the site. He would hold it against the dead and against Castor and against whatever came next. But he would hold it as the commander he actually was, not as a frightened man closing his fist. Because a frightened man closing his fist was no good to the compact, and no good to the site, and no good, when she came home, to Sybil. When she came home, he held to that the way Sybil held to be careful, a statement of intent offered to the one person who needed to hear it, even if the one person was himself. The sun came up over the interior. Somewhere out in it, 3 days deep and getting deeper, the best soldier he had ever sent anywhere was following the wrong-moving dead toward the thing the coast was afraid to name. Soren could not reach her. He had finally, fully, accepted that he could not reach her. And then he turned back to the site, and the wounded and the new day's work, because the wall would not hold itself, and holding the wall was still the only thing he could do for her, and now, at least, he would do it with his hands open instead of clenched.